Our next guest called the Netflix decline on options action on Friday.
This part right here, where it's actually gone, well, parabolic. At issue now is whether we're at risk of breaking that very steep intermediate downtrend line. That's my hunch. I think Netflix has downside risk.
It's a brilliant call from the chart master Carter Worth at Cornerstone Macro. So where does he see Netflix going now? What does this mean for F.A.N.G and, in turn, the rest of the markets? By the way, NASDAQ futures are down by about 1% right now. So, Carter, what are you seeing?
Well, each one's a bit different. This is reminiscent of Red Hat, not a F.A.N.G, but it dropped exactly 14% on its earnings miss a week and a half ago. So obviously Netflix, here's the after-hours move, post-earnings, down exactly the Red Hat move. But let's look at the chart and figure out, where might this be headed. This is that well-defined uptrend line, again, up about 108% on the year going into today's close. And what we know, of course, is the trend, as is so often the case, has been virtually perfect, over and over and over. And then today, and on Friday, just starting to hover at trend and cut below. And then what we know is we've got this, right? A huge after-hours miss. So actually, it jumped to Google. So if you could just remember what was on your eye there, we are just breaking trend. There's plenty of downside, I would think, for Netflix. Here it is, back. Look at that. Perfect. So red arrow implications are lower. How much lower? It's anybody's imagination. If it can drop 14%, it can drop 18%. Yeah. But Google, let's talk about Google. Another F.A.N.G name that's got earnings coming up. This is a different setup, not an extended circumstance, but something of a well-defined pattern. Two patterns, in fact. The first, I would think, is this: a head and shoulders bottom with the prospects of breaking out above the tops that it's now reapproached for the third time. Another way to draw it would be a cup and handle. You can call them whatever you want, but the principles are the same. Well-defined tops at a common level, and the bet is that we're going to push up and out. A couple more, and I'm done. This is really the most interesting. We know Google's been an uptrend the better part of the past 4 or 5 years, but only just recently is it making any progress to the S&P. The bottom panel is relative performance to the S&P, and if you look at this line, just now, after basically 3.5 years, we are starting to outperform the S&P. I think the setup on the day-to-day basis implies a breakout. The relative is just breaking out. I think Google's probably going to be okay on its earnings, as distinct from Netflix.
I think there is no question that Carter comes over, given the brilliant call.
Really? After Friday? Didn't we?
Michelle will bring the chair in.
Oh,
good.
Thank you,
Good
Michelle.
call.
Well, calls to get bad ones all the time, too.
Okay, so Carter, this may be sort of a theoretical kind of question, not strictly technical analysis, but do you find that the validity of technical analysis is dampened, perhaps, because of ETFs and the ETFization of the market? So we'll see a big downdraft in Netflix, and that brings the whole group down. Does that make the reading of the charts more difficult?
Well, what's interesting, so in the 20s and 30s, before in the SEC, there was talk that these syndicates would bully stocks. Big names like J.P. Morgan, there was no regulations. And then in the 60s, mutual funds were such a big player that they would influence things. And now they talk about ETFs. The truth is the patterns haven't changed. Stocks top the same way, they bottom the same way, they trend, they break trend. And while it might be accentuated, right, because people can act without having any specific knowledge of the stock through an ETF, the principles are unchanged.
This is not for Carter. This is more for us. It's just I see it on Twitter.
Okay.
It's March 26. Netflix announced Susan Rice was joining the board. Obviously, they announced the President Obama and his wife were going to be some sort of contributors. People are saying maybe this terrible numbers based on the fact is as polarized as a country are. Maybe people stepped away from Netflix because of that. That is a valid explanation in the environment that we find ourselves in. Just something to think about.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.